to you that in the last few months, because I've been working at home, I miss my morning trip in on the train where I buy the Times and I sit luxuriating, reading everything that you write and your colleagues write, and keeping myself on top and abreast of things. And because I've been 2 months locked into my study here with these two pictures behind me, which you may or may not be able to see, I've not been able to keep abreast of things. So I'm looking for you tonight to really give me an insight into some of the topics I've sort of seen coming across my radar.
I hope I can do that.
Okay, so for people out there who don't know you, and I'm sure that can't be anybody, just to give you a little flavour of who Daniel Baron Finkelstein, OBE, born 30th August 1962 and therefore 71 days before me, a British journalist and erstwhile politician, former executive editor of The Times. He remains a weekly political columnist. I'm sure all of you read what he writes and are wrapped by it. He frequently makes appearances on television. His background is that his mother, Miriam, was a Holocaust survivor of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camps. His father, Ludwig, OBE, was born in Lviv, then in Poland, now in Ukraine. And he became a professor of measurement and instrumentation. I'm going to ask you what that means in a second, at City University, London. He is the grandson, via his mother, of Dr. Alfred Wiener, Jewish activist and founder of the Wiener Library. And I'm going to ask you something about him a little bit later, if I may, Daniel. But let's start off with the uncontentious stuff, which is, what is a professor of measurement and instrumentation?
Well, it's very interesting. My father is actually a survivor of the deportation of Poles to Siberia. My grandfather was a capitalist, an iron and steel man, and he was arrested. And what they did was they would then deport the families to villages, you know, that were in the middle of effectively nowhere. It was 3 days by horse and cart to the nearest rail station, and there were no trains. And in the first winter when they were there, out of the 90 Poles that were put in this village, and there were about 120 other people, 12 of the Poles died, including somebody in my father's own. My father was about 10, 11 years old. And he had nothing much to do other than think. He couldn't go out because the gales were too great. The cold was too bitter. Even inside, they were below freezing point. And he tried to work out, why is it that the Poles are dying and the Kazakhs who live there are not dying? And he decided the reason was because they had fuel and the Poles didn't. And he began, therefore, to collect cow dung to create fuel bricks. And he said to me later, that is the first step to becoming an engineer. He became interested, despite the fact that a lot of his interests were philosophical. He was very, very interested in Jewish studies. In his retirement, he wrote a book and got a PhD on the subject of the progressive rabbinate of Warsaw. He was, Nachman Krochmal was his big special subject, and he had thousands of books on that area. But he became an engineer because of that experience. The particular field that he ended up being an engineer in was, how do you measure things? And this may seem like an arcane thing to be interested in, but if you think about computing and artificial intelligence, the root of that is the ability to measure things. You have to be able to describe them in mathematical terms in order to be able to model them for computing. And my father was the sort of earliest, really, measurement scientist. And the reason it's measurement and instrumentation is he then passed that knowledge on to instrument making. So, you know, I mean, everyone says this about their dad, I suppose, but he was a remarkable person.
That's amazing. Tell me this, is there still a seat for Professor of Instrumentation at that particular There
so
is.
My father was quite a big figure in his university, and there's a Finkelstein laboratory and the Finkelstein scholarships. He was very big in it, and it then became my brother's field. My brother's the chief scientific advisor.
Yes, I saw that.
And that's really because he went into a very similar field. He became interested in how designers design. He wrote some papers with my dad in my dad's last years. And yes, it's very much a field. The last paper that my father wrote on scientific instruments was being read in Geneva while his funeral was being held in London.
My goodness, my goodness. Not an area you went into. Your route was through politics at the LSE.
Yes, although actually I do have an MSc in systems analysis. This is a little bit my father's doing, so he could see that was the coming area, I later became, when the Times went digital, we built something that's known as the paywall. We always try and use other phrases, euphemisms, but when we went behind a paywall, I was the executive editor in charge of that, and part of that was because I had this background where I'd all my career really known all about how computers work. So I'm not the same anywhere near as my brother, or actually my sister, who has an engineering degree, but I do know a little bit.
Yeah. So you went into politics. You started off with a politics degree. You've spent pretty much your whole life in politics, I think it's fair to say, in some shape, form or another. Let's deal with some of the issues that we've been seeing coming across our screens over the last few months, some more obvious than others. Let's deal, if we can, first with the George Floyd riots. I want to ask you about those, because this is something that's spread like a virus around the world. It's ignited outrage in many communities, in many countries. Why do you think that is? Do you think if we weren't living in a pandemic, we would be facing that sort of outrage? These sorts of people on the streets, protesting, rioting?
The truth is that the United States has long been a multi-ethnic society because of the slavery industry. And therefore they had a very large, they've had more than 10% African Americans forever, really. We haven't really been. And indeed, even now, the black population is only 3% of the population, but the ethnic minority population is now 14%. And I think this is blown up for two reasons. The first is social media has meant that that what happens in the United States is very real to people of my children's generation. They feel it almost like an outcrop of their own politics, and when George Floyd was murdered, really, my middle son told me about it almost immediately after it happened. He'd seen it on social media. It was very impactful to him, and it was as if it was something that happened in British politics. And I don't really mind that, because the relationship between Britain and the United States is very precious to me. I think it's important to the Jewish community, by the way. My biggest fear is that relationship will fall apart. So that feeling of emotional connection to the United States is something that I actually quite like. There's a second reason, is it's also an aspect of the difficulty of creating multicultural societies, and the experience of minority groups in multicultural societies. And I think we have to accept that the experience of people, particularly who are visible minorities, can be very difficult, and can involve them encountering a lot of prejudice, which maybe isn't easy for us to see. So on the surface of it, we think we have abolished all sort of concrete forms of racism, and we're taking a lot of effort, but it can seem different to other.
Well, that's the white privilege point of view, isn't it?
Yeah,
we think we have abolished all of that, but we don't see how it is endemic in society, and how pervasive it is in the minority.
It's not a phrase that I use, and I don't advise anti-racism campaigners to use it either. It's got two problems for me. The first is, I don't regard it as a privilege not to be maltreated by the police. I think that's a ridiculous description of it. It's an ordinary civil right. If people do not have that ordinary civil right, then we ought to ensure that they have it. And the second reason why I dislike the phrase is that I think it's very provocative to people whom we need to persuade, who don't feel at all privileged because their lives are very difficult at the moment. I think it's a political loser of a phrase, and I note that Barack Obama, for example, never uses it.
Yeah.
But I do think the concept is getting at something. I usually call it white default. There's a very good book on male default by a woman called Caroline Criado Perez. She identifies all the ways in which, just to give an example, telephone handsets are built for male hands. The PPE equipment fitted men, but it didn't fit women. There are lots of different examples of this. She gives a brilliant example about how women would be more concerned about having the safety procedures for the bus system at bus
Yeah.
stops, and we have them all inside the bus instead, right? And so there is a lot of a lot of male default, and I think the truth is there's white default as well.
Yeah, and that's what I was really saying. What I was saying to you is that when we look at the riots that are taking place, and we wonder why they're taking place, that sense of misunderstanding or lack of empathy, if you want to call it, is the sort of white privilege notion, isn't it?
I agree. And I think
why is it happening? It shouldn't be happening. I don't really get it.
Yeah, I do. I agree. I think one of the things about it is within all of these kind of events, there will be some people who make ridiculous points and behave in bad ways. And we need to not let those people define the debate, right? At the core of it, there are some very reasonable people, possibly our own children and grandchildren, going to this rally to make points about harmony and racial equality, which are important to Jews as well as they are to anyone else. Yeah, yeah. And if we can keep our eyes on that, and not let ourselves, I wrote a piece this week about this, not let ourselves be distracted by the fact that one person in Huddersfield wants to get rid of Harold Wilson's statue, because that isn't actually really a big problem. It's not, no one's going to get rid of Harold Wilson.
What do you think about that iconography? What do you think about the pulling down of statues?
Well, first of all, I'm against the pulling down. Oh, yes.
Just to cut across you just for a second, it's something that my son got very exercised and vexed about. Especially when the Colston statue came down, because, of course, whilst he may have a deplorable past, he was an art historian, and he was also instrumental in building many cities, many mercantile cities. And his solution is, well, look, he's got a deplorable past. Put a plaque on the statue that identifies who he is, identifies what he's done to the good, and highlight the detriment in his past. Don't pull the statue down. It achieves nothing. It ill-educates people, and it in a way, it misinforms them about the history of a particular place or a particular culture. So what do you say about that?
Okay, so I incline to that view as well, but I'm not a purist about it. So first of all, I am a purist about tearing things down, right? You can't, that's no way of behaving, and you can't let someone behave like that. I'm even resistant, even to sort of, to a kind of people mobbing people up through some sort of peaceful system to do things, but I certainly am when people take it upon themselves to tear down, grade 2 listed edifices, right?
Yeah.
So I'm completely opposed to that, and quite strongly opposed to it. And I think it was wrong for the police to stand by and just let that happen. But I do think two things. First of all, I don't think there's anything wrong with us assessing the monuments we have up. The example I give is the monument at Bank, which was put up for the Great Fire of London. Not long after it was put up, there was a plaque put that blamed the Great Fire of London on the Catholics. That was then removed, and then there were the Gordon riots, and it was put back. And then it used to cause traffic jams and protests, and they removed it again. And so throughout we wouldn't want that to be up there. And throughout our history, we've been willing to revise and review. Now, mostly, I think that can be done through signs. I actually thought Colston was a slightly different matter. That statue was put there in the late 1800s, really, really to sort of celebrate as one of the sort of the landmark citizens of Bristol, somebody who made his fortune from the slave trade. And I think that probably we can see now that wasn't appropriate. And I don't have a problem with putting that in a museum.
Yeah, in fact, I think one of the councillors said they were reassessing whether it should remain in place anyway, probably for very much the reasons that you've identified there. But I think they were beaten to the punch, as it were. But what do you say about this? Because these riots, and they have become demonstrations which at times have turned into riots, they've been very polarizing, haven't they? They've polarized the black community, they've polarized the white community, they've polarized people who said, well, it's the right thing to go out and demonstrate, it's the wrong thing to riot. And unfortunately, it's given credence, if that's the right word, to various people who have said, well, why is it that the black community has to vent its frustration in this way? Why can't it do it through dialogue? Why can't it do it through peaceful protest?
I mean, first of all, I don't think much of the violence was from every demonstration that is held for any kind of social justice attracts to it a small group
of the counter demonstrators, definitely
revolutionary activists who pick a fight with the police.
Yeah,
and the only solution to that is like not to have demonstrations. And to be fair to the Black Lives Matter organisers in Britain, they literally didn't, at really quite great cost to themselves, they decided not to hold the second march when they thought that it would produce a large violent outburst. And I would say some of the things that some of them have said I think are ridiculous. Some of them I disagree with, but on the whole I think they've been pretty responsible and are making a reasonable point. Not everything they say I agree with, because I'm very much sort of pro-capitalist, and I don't, and I think some of their points about statues and everything have been wrong, but I basically think they've been reasonably responsible. All protest marches are polarizing, and that's not my favored way of conducting politics, but we have to note that this produced that emotional reaction. We have to be sensitive about it, and I suppose one of my colleagues called it read the room. We have to read the room.
Yeah. I think one of the things that struck me is, as you've identified there, that many marches will attract people from different hues in terms of their politics, and the more radical elements will come along and take part in those marches. And we seem to see a lot of that in these marches. Maybe that's just the media focusing on what sells papers or excites people on the television. Do you think they were peaceful protests, or do you think they had a tendency perhaps to become too fractious too quickly?
Well, by and large, but there's no question that they, there is an element of that. I did think it was quite shocking, the Colston statue, and I think there was definitely a kind of, a significant group of people who engaged themselves in that sort of behaviour on the Black Lives Matter rally as well. But on the whole, I thought it was reasonably responsible. That's a different matter in the United States, where some of those things have become just looting opportunities.
Yeah, they did. And I'm sure you, as many other people, did see some of those videos in New York with many stores with their windows smashed, boarded up, looted. I think another worrying feature of this was how I read that in LA, the Jewish community seemed to have graffiti on their stores. Their stores were looted. I noticed as well the protests in Paris, where somebody from the crowd shouted out in French, "Dirty Jew," at some counter-protesters. And the Jewish experience, somehow, people will drag that into this, won't they?
Yeah, well, it's Tom Lehrer's thing. Everyone gets at the Jews, but
Correct.
I think it's something that we have to keep an eye on, actually. Because we're all aware that during the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King relied on some prominent Jews as a really key part of his political movement. But the relationship between the African American and Jewish communities has broken down, really. And that's very worrying. I saw an extraordinary video of that was put out by somebody called Ice Cube, and his rapper.
Yeah. I saw that too.
And he also had in it which was sort of the famous Corbyn mural that he was.
Yeah. He adopted that.
he then also had accused the FBI of killing Malcolm X above a sort of picture of Louis Farrakhan, and of course the great irony of it is Louis Farrakhan probably killed Malcolm X. So he certainly was involved in it. So the truth is there is an edge of the militant African American anti-racist movement that is either anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist.
Yeah,
is a worry, but we still have a great deal to gain from racial justice in general.
no, I don't disagree with that, but it is that hijacking, isn't it, of a cause to somehow slip in either an attempt to undermine Jews, undermine Israel. I saw, for example, Jackie Walker on her Twitter page saying actual Nazi mobs rioting in London. Board of Deputies, silent. Lord John Mann, silent. Margaret Hodge, silent. Ruth Smith, silent. Rachel Riley, silent. J.K. Rowling, I didn't know she'd made any comments in support of Jews, silent.
Yeah,
Labour against anti-Semitism, Jewish Labour, silent.
Who was that? Who said that?
That was Jackie Walker on her Twitter.
I mean, Jackie Walker. You know,
Jackie, I know.
Well, I think this important point about someone like Jackie Walker. I think there is a serious problem on the far left, and it was certainly a problem when that group of people had taken over the Labour Party. But Jackie Walker is quite an isolated individual, somebody whom even Jeremy Corbyn expelled from the party, although I think they maintain their relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I do think we need to be careful not to, in our minds, expand the influence of Jackie Walker, for example.
No, I don't.
So I agree, because there is always somebody who's going to say something really stupid. I mean, somebody was being inundated with social media messages the other day because they'd proposed removing Churchill and putting a statue of Stalin in Parliament Square, and they were deadly serious person, right? I mean, they were serious about what they thought, and there's always somebody who believes even that. And we can exhaust ourselves trying to eliminate all ridiculous opinions, and we'll never succeed.
No, but I don't forget, of course, the fact that she, some months ago, maybe it was a year ago, said that outrageous thing about the Jews being the financiers of the sugar and slave trade.
Yeah, so, that is, interestingly enough, I mentioned Louis Farrakhan. That originated with the Nation of Islam. So
yes, it did.
The Nation of Islam being the kind of black African American separationist, segregationist movement, really, in the United States, and it was one of their ideas.
Yeah. Anyway, the issue of Jackie Walker and Labour anti-Semitism segues quite neatly into the next thing I want to ask you about, Keir Starmer. And I think my question or statement to you is: New Labour, old Labour, or no Labour? What's your view?
So I think he's not quite new. So the first thing I would say is I think Keir Starmer is an intelligent, pleasant, and rational individual who holds broadly mainstream parliamentary democratic political views. And I think he's sharply to be distinguished from his predecessor.
Agreed.
And personally, I find him impressive and interesting, and I like him. I don't share his politics entirely because I'm a conservative, and I think his inclinations would be to tax more than I would, to interfere more than I would, to spend more than I think, and to spend more than I think should be spent. Although in the situation we're in at the moment, we're having to do all those things anyway. But I think there'll come a moment when we can't do those anymore because we've done them now. And I'm not sure he'd recognise that moment. So I'm not saying, I would vote for him, but I am saying I think he's quite impressive. So then the second thing is how to categorise him. I don't think he's like Tony Blair. Tony Blair, I think, was substantially a centre-right political figure in terms of his politics. I think he was.
He's a notch along from there, isn't he?
I think he's much more like Ed Miliband's politics.
Yeah, quite.
Which is by contrast with Jeremy Corbyn's not a disaster. It's not my politics, but it's respectable and intelligent. I think that's where he is. So in the kind of Kinnock soft left tradition, which is Wilson's tradition too. It's often been the leadership of the middle.
I mean, I put him somewhere between Kinnock and Blair, but further along towards the centre than Kinnock, but probably nowhere near.
I'm not sure that's true. I think he's quite I think he's quite left wing as Keir Starmer, actually. But I think he's also.
Yes, but he's intellectual left wing. If you know what I mean.
But I think that's within a respectable mainstream.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. He's intellectual left wing, and therefore he sees the practicalities of what he may need to do to get into government, which is something that Jeremy Corbyn would never have seen. So he has that malleability that may lead Labour out of the darkness. Do you think he can?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So I absolutely think the Labour can win the next general election. It is hard for them to win a majority, but I don't think it's impossible. It's not that hard for them to end up in a position whereby the Conservatives can't form a government and they can. So I think there's every chance of Keir Starmer becoming Prime Minister, but we are quite a long way. 4.5 years, that is a long time. So we're quite a long way away from that.
His popularity rating I saw the other day was equal with Johnson, which maybe no.
Look, it's very important at the beginning. People form a very immediate political view of leaders. They're not watching that carefully. And today there was a poll online, and it appeared that 13% of people believed that the pandemic was a result of a global attempt to make vaccination compulsory. And on the surface of it, that looked like an extraordinarily large proportion of people committing themselves to a pretty eccentric proposition. But the truth is that there's at least that proportion of the population who don't understand what on earth that sentence means, right?
I don't mind that sentence as long as it doesn't have in brackets created by the Jews.
I usually will end up that way, but the point about it, one of the points I'm making is a different one. People are not, people do not do not follow politics very carefully or take a very sophisticated view of it, and first impressions matter a lot, and I think that it's a bit early in their creation of their view of Keir Starmer, but their view is basically positive.
Well, he's had a soft.
That's a very strong positive feature for Labour.
He's had a soft landing, hasn't he? He hasn't been exposed because of the way Parliament's been set up to a really strong and vital debate, which could have get very bad tempered. The country's been distracted with what's been going on, so in a way, he's been allowed to ease in. Do you think he has what it takes? And this is no particular view that I express about myself, but that to put the left in its box?
It's quite a hard task, and I don't know. I think it's possible. I think he's steelier than I thought. I've been reading a document which was prepared by the previous General Secretary of the Labour Party to explain what had happened and why the governance unit of the Labour Party didn't expel more people for anti-Semitism. It's the left-wing case, and it's shockingly factional. It's unbelievable to see one group of people write about another. It publishes all the WhatsApps and emails of all the members of staff, includes a whole variety of personal information, including whether people went on sick leave for problems. It's a really extraordinary thing, and when I read that, I thought this is a very deep cleavage, different from the factional fights in other parties, and I think they will have difficulty dealing with that. On the other hand, it may not turn out, weirdly, despite the fact that Jeremy Corbyn was the leader, to be that big a group, and he may therefore be able to cope with it. He may just have the majority. And if one of the things experiences, I'll just do you a different story. After the 2005 general election, 2001 general election, I was working on the Times. We were approaching the 2005 general election. It looked like the Conservatives were going to lose again, and I got together with a group of people, a small group of people, to discuss. And we used to have pizza evenings, once every 6 weeks or so, to discuss what are we going to do about the Conservative Party. We're going to lose again. what will happen after the election? How will we get those people who run the party? We thought it'd probably be David Davis to move. Now, the people in that little dinner group were Michael Gove, George
Yeah.
Osborne,
Yeah.
and David Cameron,
Yeah.
right? Myself, we and the one thing that we never considered was that David could run for the leadership. David thought that up himself. And after the general election, when we were discussing what we should do next, he had made that decision very quickly. And at that point, he had hardly any support. He had the support of Michael Gove, George, obviously, Oliver Letwin, and Boris. The and the leadership election then panned out in such a way he won.
Yeah.
That changed the Conservative Party by that single act, because winning the leadership is unbelievably powerful. You have all the levers to set the party's policy. You choose the shadow cabinet. You decide what the line to take is. People decide they're going to accommodate to you because you're the leader. You control the route to progress inside the party. If people depart from your line, they're being disloyal. Other members of the party don't like that, so you get criticised for that. Being the leader of the party is an unbelievably powerful thing. And what Keir Starmer has done is captured the leadership of the party in such a way that just by that mere act, he has sidelined the left quite a large degree.
I think there's a fundamental difference between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. The Labour Party have more stakeholders, if I can put that in inverted commas, that it answers to in the unions, in a whole series of other areas, which over the years it's built up big constituencies in, which made it electable, of course, with Tony Blair. But what it means is there are more people for him to answer to. There are more people to snipe, more people to backbite. The roots go deeper.
That's good analysis.
Conservatism doesn't work like that, does it?
No, it's good analysis. It is true. You probably gain less when you capture the leadership of the Labour Party to capturing the leadership of the Conservative Party in terms of control, but it's still very substantial. That's what I would argue. So my view is I think he will have difficulty with the left. There are big issues still to come that will be hard for him. But I think he's got a lot going for him merely in winning the leadership.
The perception of the Jewish community, rightly or wrongly, and I think personally rightly, that it became a party that was, inverted commas, institutionally racist, that couldn't be trusted anymore, that would not be, quote, good for the Jews, that in fact was hostile to the Jews, or at the very least didn't care too much about them. That's going to be a hard label to shake, isn't it? Do you think he can win back the trust of the Jewish community?
It is going to be hard, but my view is that the root of Labour anti-Semitism was in something I call Leninist anti-imperialism, that had two prongs, right? One was the capitalism was only protected by the country making imperialist adventures, which financed the wages of the people working in this country. That is the idea of imperialism and anti-imperialism, right? And they took that up and so the way to destroy capitalism is to support non-aligned anti-colonial resistance movements. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian government, any group that Chavez, as an example, the Bolivarian socialists, those are all supporters of anti-imperialism that can help to bring down the United States and through that make it impossible for capitalists to pay wages, sustainable wages in this country, which will produce a backlash from working class people and oppose capitalism. That is the theory. Now, if you hold that as a theory, which is, by the way, a pretty eccentric, attenuated theory, but it's held by a lot of people by a lot of people on the far left, of which Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell are two. And this has two things. One is the Jews support Israel, and Israel is an occupying force, that's an imperialist force, and they are anti-imperialists. So therefore, Israel forms a central function for them. And the second thing is Jews are banking capitalists.
Correct.
And all this imperialism is being done on behalf of the bankers. So for this reason, this Leninist anti-imperialism produces, and it's also, by the way, a part of the far left part of African American politics in the United States as well, because Malcolm X had this view too, and Nation of Islam had this view too. It produces anti-Semitism.
But don't you think it's bled into the mainstream left as well? And that's the problem. Look at the way Momentum seemed to get so many people out on the streets. Now I know it, of course, the left are very good at bussing in the faithful to go onto the streets, but it's something that seems to have bled into mainstream politics. That again, this idea of anti-Western, anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism. Of course, the Jews get dragged into that.
Yes, I think it's a serious part of the left, and therefore part of Keir Starmer's coalition. And because Jeremy Corbyn gave it leadership and gave it a voice, that's why it then began to build numbers of people, and we began to see it, grow on social media, and we began to see it gain more expression, and it continues. Yeah, I think it's a serious problem. But I'm not of the view that it will be that it's undefeatable, and I think it's massively weakened by not having Corbyn as the leader, because he was giving a lead to those people in that direction.
You can't put the genie back in the bottle, it seems to me. And these thoughts, which were never really aired in the mainstream, are now out there in the mainstream. And I'm sure you've seen it. Many of us have seen it. I've seen it at work. People you would never have thought shared these sorts of views or would utter the type of thing about Jewish control, anti-capitalism. They are expressing them, and there seems to be a lot of currency amongst the young, which is a worry, isn't it?
It is a worry, yeah.
Okay.
I think it is a worry, and I think it is something that we will continue to have to fight and argue against, which unfortunately is not a fight in which Israel's helping us very much.
Right. That brings me to leaving this to one side for the moment. The proposed annexation. If that's what you're referring to at this moment in time. Give us your views on that, Daniel, if you would.
Well, there are two parts to this. First of all, I don't know whether everyone I agrees on this, but my view is that the only way of getting peace in the Middle East is through a two-state solution. I do acknowledge that is very hard, and we have been a partner for a two-state solution without anyone to negotiate with who really wants one back, right? But there's no future in losing patience with that approach. In the end, if Israel were to become a single state that governed the whole of Israel, the West Bank, maybe Gaza too, it can only do that as a Jewish state by being an apartheid government. That's the only way you could do that. And we all know that we don't want to see that happen. So my view is two states for moral reasons, for reasons of justice to Palestinian people, for reasons of peace and security, for reasons of world support is the only route. And my view is anything that makes a two-state solution more difficult is a bad idea. There's another part to this, which is the other thing is that Israel's doing this partly in response to the Trump peace proposal, or the Trump proposal. Relying on Donald Trump seems to me obviously foolish. It's not only the case he may not last, but even if he did last, he is not a reliable partner for anything. If you read our story this morning, the Times' newspaper this morning, we had a story in which he had a discussion with Theresa May, in which it became apparent he did not know that Britain was a nuclear state, right? Now, this is not somebody who is going to negotiate sophisticated peace in the Middle East. He doesn't know what he's talking about a lot of the time.
But I'm not sure anybody's been able to negotiate sophisticated peace in the Middle East.
Well, Clinton came close, didn't he?
And it fell to pieces. The point I think I'd make to you is, isn't this simply giving flesh to what people know is the truth on the ground anyway?
No, I think it's not doing that. I think it's, I think it's a foolish idea to take off the negotiating table things that we're going to need to negotiate over in the end. You know, the only way there'll ever be a lasting peace in Israel is with a two-state solution.
Daniel, take a step back. Do you credibly see anybody coming forward from the ranks of the Palestinian Politburo, whether it be Hamas, whether it be from Abbas's side, coming forward in this generation or in a generation beyond you and me, who could actually make a credible partner for peace?
No.
Of course, one doesn't give up trying, but that's the reality, isn't it?
No, I absolutely don't. So I think the situation is, I'm very pessimistic for the short to medium term, but you can't give up, and
No.
our nation is giving up.
So you know what the Israelis might say is, well, if that's never going to happen, what does it matter?
Say that.
Annex or not annex?
I didn't say that. And there's a big difference, and they know that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be having. If there's no difference between annex and not annex, then don't annex, right? Look, I'm not an Israeli politician. Okay?
No.
Yeah, and that's very important. One of the reasons I take this view is I see it through a Jewish perspective, but also through a British foreign policy perspective.
Well, I want to ask you about that. Because one of the things that's pinged up on my feed here is, what effect do you think this will have on British foreign policy and the relationship between Israel and Britain?
Well, it's very bad. I know the foreign, I've spoken to the Foreign Office about this. I know the Foreign Secretary is very worried about it. This government is extremely pro-Israel. It's actually been a strong strand of Boris Johnson's politics for a long time. I know that that's also Dominic Raab's view, but it puts the British government in a very difficult position. We are, as a country, completely opposed to this policy because it will make a two-state solution, which is what we're aiming for, more difficult. We have taken the view always that the failing in this discussion has been mainly on the Palestinian side. The British have actually sustained that argument for a long, long time. This will be a very big step away from that. I think it will be a big problem. And the assumption is that Donald Trump will go on forever. He may not even go on for a few months.
What do you see as perhaps the reason why the Palestinians haven't negotiated? Something else that pings up on my feed here is they want nothing less than destruction of Israel. Otherwise, they would have already have negotiated. I suspect it isn't as binary as that. But what do you think is the reason?
It's obviously this is a longer conversation, but they've been incredibly poorly led, and also I think the world has definitely given them the view that if they keep holding out, they'll get more and more, and that I think has been a mistake of world policy. They haven't felt they have to settle, the other thing about it is there's a big leadership of very extreme people who kill anybody who wants to come to terms. It's always been a really big problem. For years and years, it's been a big problem. But all of these things don't mean you can give up.
No, I understand. Rabbi Fine, how long we got left?
Oh, you can't ask me that. That's not fair. That's not fair.
You as the bad man.
Yeah, I know. You can't do that, please. Well, officially we've got 5 minutes or so.
Okay, that's great. All right, Daniel, can I then again change tack? What do you make of the government's handling of the COVID crisis? Because they've come in for a lot of stick in recent weeks, if not from the beginning. Do you think that's fair? Do you think it's been unfair?
Some of it's been pretty unfair, but let's start with this. We have got very bad rate of deaths compared to the rest of the world. It is still not the end of this crisis, and we don't know how we'll emerge from it in the end. So it's a bit early to make the judgment, but it certainly does cause question over the government's handling. And there are some issues that we should look at. One is whether or not we locked down at the correct time, or did we lock down too late? The second is that we sent people home from hospital to care homes, having been well, okay, I'll come on to why we did that in a second. The third thing is the question of whether we had enough tests or whether we could have prevented it, as Germany did before it spread. And there are other issues over to question, like PPE, but they were faced by everyone. Those are the three, I think, that are the most relevant to Britain.
Can I cut across just for a second? Because on that, I know you're going to elaborate, but on that first one, my own view is, whilst we may have locked down too late, British mentality is such, and I think this is one of our great strengths, we don't want anyone to tell us what to do. And if we had imposed something draconian too early, it would have been abused.
That's possible. Look, that's all hypothetical. But the thing that unites all three of those things is that the government consulted scientific advice and followed it. Now, there is a question over whether or not it had a proper grip over those things, whether it questioned it. In the case, for example, of the care homes, they were advised that this did not transmit when it was asymptomatic, and that's why they did it, right? Now, some of this scientific advice has turned out to be not as good as it should have been. And in the case of our testing capacity, that was also the case. The government must take responsibility for it, but I would prefer them to have followed scientific advice that was wrong than make it up as they go along. So I think in the end they probably will end up being criticised for their handling of it just because of the numbers. But I think some of that criticism is not particularly fair, because what they did was what they ought to have done, which is to follow the advice they were given.
And do you think it's been fair or unfair when we've seen politicians of different colours trying to make currency from it? Too much playing of politics?
No, I don't actually. I think it's reasonable. I think that it's reasonable for opposition politicians to critique the government, and they've kept it reasonably inside the boundaries of
It's been reasonably tame, hasn't it?
Unity. I would say this. I think if the government wanted less criticism, it would have had to have involved the opposition more in its decision making than it decided it wanted to do. But given that it didn't do that, I think that it has to accept that it would be criticised from outside. And I haven't got a problem with. I wouldn't have a problem with the way that happened.
Can I round off then, asking you about this? Your grandfather, Alf Rabina, used to spend a lot of time charting Nazi activities both before the war and after the war. What do you think he would make of the current climate in Britain today? Anti-Semitism, real, unreal, a ghost, a phantom, or is it it's certainly greater than it was perhaps in the early part of your life and my life?
Yeah, so both my grandparents, my grandfathers, were assimilationists, and they believed that you could be a patriotic Pole and a Jew in Poland, and a patriotic German and a Jew in Germany. You know, what happened to them was profoundly disillusioning. But all their grandchildren have set about trying to do the same thing again in our generation in Britain. And I do ask myself all the time, you know, are we going to be disillusioned? I think that they would remain optimistic, both of them, but they wouldn't be complacent. I've just been reading my grandfather, for those of you who don't know, my maternal grandfather was really an anti-Nazi activist from before there was really a proper Nazi party. He came back from the First World War, and even in 1919, as one of the leading activists in the Jewish community in Germany, which he began to write about the danger of pogroms. If you read his document that he wrote, which was called "Towards a Pogrom?" ? You know, which turned out to be very prescient. It was clearly worse than the situation we face in this country, right? The virulence and the extent and the directness of anti-Semitism in Germany in 1919 was much greater and much worse than the situation we face here. And it's important to get that into perspective. You read that document and it's instantly apparent. It's quite shocking how strong and how clear it was. But I think he would definitely be, you know, a little bit more concerned than he would have been 10 years ago. At my 50th birthday party, I said that the things that the disasters that overtook my parents and my grandparents had not overtaken me. That was, and I'm not sure that I would make.
Couldn't say that with the same confidence now, could you?
Oh, I wouldn't make the same speech if my 50th birthday was tomorrow.
No, quite.
Just because the tone has definitely changed in the last few years, I'm a bit more worried. But I wouldn't want to leave anyone to feel that that went too far. I think we are, you know, this country's still. I tell a little story, which maybe is a good way to finish this section. When the Queen opens Parliament, all the members of the House of Lords can gather from whenever they like. You wear your so one time you wear ermine. You go into and you can sit anywhere you like in the chamber. And the earlier you get there, the nearer you get to sit up near the Queen and all the action, as Woody Allen would put it, which is great because it's an incredibly you know, vivid affair, and I really enjoyed being there. But I noticed and laughed the first time I went in for one of these. I looked round and there were 10 of us in the chamber, and we were all Jews that had got there first, all Jewish peers. And then across the aisle from one side, one of the Jews shouted out to another, to me actually, the great Jewish call of the ages, which is, where are we going to have lunch? I tell that story just to think we still live in a pretty accommodating country for Jews. It's still a pretty great place to live. And I remain confident and optimistic about it, but never complacent.
Yeah. Let me just match that with this one point. When I took silk, you have to go in and you have to bow to each of the heads of the divisions in the High Court. And I remember going in, as you do, to bow to the heads of the division in the High Court. And there were 5 heads of division. And as I looked to my left, there was the Welshman. And then I looked front of me, and there was the Master of the Rolls, who was Jewish, Lord Dyson. Then I looked at the chairman of the Supreme Court, and there was Lord Newburger. And then I looked along to the head of the Queen's Bench Division, and there was Lord Leveson. And then to the right side, and I thought, what a bloody marvellous thing that is. Yeah, we do live in a wonderful country where we have been afforded this great wonder of being able to live our lives and do well and to live comfortably and to participate and to contribute, as I think we have and you do, I know, every day. And I think you write wonderful articles all the time. Keep up the good work. We have been greatly honoured and greatly privileged to have you with us tonight. I hope people who have been listening in and watching in will be thrilled with what they've heard from you. And I'm told you can see it on YouTube. So there you go, double bubble. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you for coming. And thank you for being tolerant of this 5 minutes late or so. But it was lovely to meet you. I'm sorry it wasn't in person, but we're all neighbours, so hopefully we'll bump into each other. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you.
Jeremy?
Rabbi Fine just asked me if I'd say a few words. I'd just like to say a huge thank you again to Baron Daniel Finkelstein, who I knew from when our respective children were at Mariah Jewish Day School many years ago. As ever, Daniel, you handle a huge range of topics with great insight and analysis. We really appreciate you giving up your time tonight for us, and I hope your family will forgive us for taking you away from the washing up. You're probably delighted. I'd also like to thank our very own Jacob Levy, QC. We all know what a sharp mind you have and what a superb speaker you are. Tonight, however, we got to see a slightly different side of you, truly in conversation with an outstanding political columnist and journalist, and providing a large audience tonight with a really entertaining evening. And also, just finally like to thank everyone tonight for coming. I'd respectfully like to remind everyone that we ask for a £10 voluntary donation, which can be made via the Shaw office or the Shaw website. And please quote Academy when making your payment. Next Thursday's Academy Current Affairs session, as mentioned by Rabbi Fine earlier, we'll see and hear Lord David Panic QC talk on the subject of how the criminal and civil courts are coping with COVID-19. That's all from me. I just wish you well and wish